from Rome. Now, this paper is called The Holy Shroud and Othon de la Roche, Notes for a Working Hypothesis on the Missing Years. So if you sat through Jack's presentation, you might get a different view on it, maybe a different angle, because as you can tell, Jack outlined about 15 various theories, and so maybe we can eventually settle on one theory, Michaela, you ready? She needs a mic. Here it is, right here. This is your microphone. If you'll put that around your ear, and hopefully we can turn it on. Yeah, just put it around your ear. Why don't you give that a test? See if that's working.
Okay, testing. No?
No. Okay. Oh, now it's off. Well, let's see. How about now?
Testing? Okay.
You got it.
Got it?
So,
okay.
All right, we have sound.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everybody. So, since the 14th century, when the Shroud appeared in the French village of Liray, there are no historical gaps. Unfortunately, there isn't a tradition of the precise way in which Geoffroy de Charny has come into possession of a relic of such importance that, according to some authors, is a point that might suggest a hoax on their part, which forced them to an awkward silence. In fact, historical research has demonstrated the high degree of integrity of de Charny, and therefore it seems more correct to think that de Charny had valid reasons for not indicating the origin of the shroud, perhaps related to the rather strict rules of the Church with regard to the recent discovery of relics, their authenticity and circulation. This secrecy is the basis of some assumptions about the path taken to arrive in Europe. Although the period prior to the 14th century we have no certain news, as well as that of the centuries that follow, not for this has ceased to carry out research and, most importantly, does not mean that we must hold close adversely research on the ancient history of the Shroud, especially considering the significant acquisitions that the direct examination have over the years accumulated. Even if it's accepted that the Turin shroud and the cloth observed in Constantinople by the Crusader knight Robert de Clary were one and the same object, there are still difficulties in establishing a chronology for the relic during the historical gap of more or less 150 years, from 1204 in Constantinople to its reappearance in Liray in the 14th century. Where is the Holy Shroud in this period? There are several hypotheses that over time have been made by scholars to try to explain this period. The history of this dark period, rather than a reconstruction of historical facts, could be best exposed through a history of historiography, a history of the hypotheses, namely, that were made to illuminate the past of the Shroud. The theories put forward, although different from each other, can be grouped into two different strands. Those that provide a direct acquisition of the Holy Shroud by Geoffroy de Charny, a period slightly earlier than the official appearance, and those involving an acquisition through a family ancestry. Today, I want to present an additional hypothesis in an attempt to explain the intervening period during which the Shroud completely disappeared. Since the 16th century, there was already a tradition which associated the Shroud with Greece. Emanuele Filiberto Pingone, in the first book entirely devoted to the Holy Shroud, was the first to identify Marguerite de Charny as a woman with Greek origin, inviting them to investigate in this direction. This search thread has continued to this day. The Greek track becomes even more interesting if we consider the indications contained in some documents that locate a shroud in Athens at the beginning of the 13th century. First of all, a letter written on August 1st, 1205 by Theodore Angel Comnenus nephew of Isaac II, Byzantine emperor, during the plunder of 1204 to Pope Innocent III. In this missive, Theodore begged the Holy Father to retrieve as soon as possible precious relics that had been missing for over a year, and wrote about the presence of the Christ Shroud in Athens. Moreover, the papal legate Benedict of Santa Susanna in the summer of 1205 was in Athens with his interpreter and counselor Nicholas of Otranto to attend an interreligious meeting. Then Nicholas wrote in 1207 about relics stolen in 1204 that he saw subsequently with his own eyes. Nicholas of Otranto was indeed in Athens, and so it is possible that he saw the shroud. Why Athens? After the splitting up of the Byzantine Empire gave birth to the Eastern Latin Empire, Othon de la Roche, Baron of Rey-sur-Saône, became Lord of Athens. Othon, consular for Marquis Boniface of Monferrato, Knight Commander of the Fourth Crusade, was among the Burgundy Knights taking part in the siege of Constantinople. He was gifted of a great strategic and organizational skill, as well as a hard perseverance. He certainly was one of the high-profile characters of the whole Crusade army. Born around 1170 into a branch of the noble family of Rey, enthusiastic about liberating the Holy Land, Othon, giving a good example to many of his compatriots, took the cross at the Cistercian Abbey of Cîteaux in 1201. Considering the route and the battles faced, we hypothesize that Othon arrived in Attica and afterwards in Athens around the end of 1204 or the beginning of 1205. Among the opposition the new Lord of Athens had to face, there was the local church, especially Metropolitan Michael Coniatus, who, after a long negotiation, agreed to participate in a religious meeting in Athens in the summer of 1205. It is at about this time that, as already noted, Theodore Angel Comnenus mentioned in a letter to Innocent III that Christ's shroud was present in Athens. Othon organized his lands on the strength of the French feudal model. Athens became the nominal capital, and for this reason, Othon built his house on the Acropolis, while Thebes became the political and military capital. We still have a picture representing the tower of Othon's castle, destroyed in 1875. It was square and it was erected on the southern side of the propylae. Here we can see a 3D reconstruction of the Acropolis under Othon de la Roche. And here the Parthenon transformed in a Catholic church. Othon, as a crusader, did not ignore religion in his lands, and mainly monks colonized his new properties. In 1207, Orthodox monks were banned from Daphne Monastery, which was assigned to monks from the French Abbey of Bellevaux. They converted the monastery into a Cistercian abbey. The Abbey of Bellevaux, founded by Pont de la Roche on March 22, 1119, was the reference point for all travels between East and West after 1204. The de la Roche family would always preserve importance in the events of the religious complex. Through donations, and members of the family obtained the right of being buried there. Extending his properties, the Lord of Athens parceled out his land to his offspring. For our interest, Othon II is very important. In fact, he is the son who controlled the place of Rey-sur-Saône. Rey-sur-Saône castle is today in a small village of around 200 people, and after the death of Countess Diane Regina de Salbert, the last descendant of Othon de la Roche, it became a property of the Haute-Saône department. In the ancient tower of the castle are preserved numerous family treasures. Among these, they have objects from the First Crusade, taken there directly by Othon de la Roche. Our attention is immediately caught by some cross-shaped relics. One of these contains a fragment of the true cross, taken by the first Lord of Athens in 1204 and placed in a relic container from Pope Pius IX in 1863. Another two relic containers shaped like a Greek cross preserve a fragment of the true cross with soil from the Holy Land, while the other contains only soil from where Christ had stepped. These relic containers could prove the direct origin from Constantinople. Behind this object, there is a wooden coffer with a label put on it in the 20th century, on which there is written, 13th century coffer in which was preserved in Ray Castle the Shroud of Christ brought by Othon de Ray from Constantinople, 1206. The front side of the coffer is simply chiseled, while in the middle of the sides there are inlaid shields. It is a parallelepiped, 45 centimeters long, 25 wide, and 30 deep. It is on a base and it is closed by a lid. A hole in the lid and four on the front side could be the place for a padlock. Nowadays, it is not possible to pinpoint for how long the coffer presence can be documented in the castle, even if we have a lot of data on it. Examining the coffer, we can see that the cut is characteristic of the second half of the 14th century. Actually, we know that the only original part of it is the bottom. No scientific analysis on the coffer were planned. As regards the labor put on the coffer, according to which the shroud was in Roche Castle in 1206, it refers to a hypothesis guessed years ago from local historians. They stated that Othon, after taking possession of the shroud, would have given it as a gift to the Besançon Cathedral during that same year. The historian Perisieux adds that Othon would have sent the shroud to his father, who, in 1206, gave it away as a gift. The fact that Pont de la Roche, the father of Othon, died in 1203, clashes with this belief. It is therefore impossible that he received the shroud in 1206. Moreover, it is unlikely that the de la Roche family deprived itself of a relic stolen in Constantinople, giving it to the local church. In this way, they would have proven the ownership of a relic that was a punishable fact. All these things make this hypothesis unreliable and thus suggest that the shroud could have reached Ray-sur-Saône Castle only after 1206. We have to answer three questions. First of all, how the shroud came to Othon's hands and was then transferred to France. Then, when did it arrive in France? And finally, if the folded shroud could be kept in the coffer just described. As far as the first question, during the siege of April 14, 1204, Othon was among the Burgundians following Henry of Flanders in the Blackerne Palace. The Pharaoh's church was at a certain distance from the place where Robert de Clary said he has seen the shroud, the church of Blackerne. Emperors in Constantinople lived in the Bucolian Palace near the Pharaoh's church until the end of the 12th century. Then they resided in Blackerne. This is the reason why the shroud was moved from the Pharaoh's church near the Bucolion when it was put in 944 to be transferred to Blackerne near the new imperial residence. It is also possible that the shroud had been moved there with the function of palladium in order to protect the city from possible invasions. In my opinion, it is not sustainable that in the days of savage depredation, Othon went to the church in Blackerne and took the shroud. In fact, there were numerous death warrants against people who plundered. It is more plausible that during the sharing out of the plunder, Othon de la Roche was given the shroud. This could explain how the pious Othon obtained the most important treasure of Christendom without illegal acts. Unfortunately, the shroud is not mentioned in the inventories of relics taken from Constantinople and distributed among French crusaders. But Theodore's letter about Christ's shroud in Athens in 1205, discussed below, does indicate Othon's possession. When was it taken to France? We have a lot of data regarding this fact. The latest record signaling the presence of Othon in Athens is a papal bull of Honorius III, dated February 12th, 1225. It is interesting to notice that just from this year, the lordship was transferred to Othon's son Guy. And the first Lord of Athens returned to France and contributed to the enrichment of Bellevaux Abbey. It is possible that Othon took the shroud with him when he returned home. It is highly unlikely that he would have left such a valuable piece of loot in Greece when he could easily take it during his cruise back home. Othon died some years after. In a document dated 1234, his son, Othon II, stated that in 1234 he was already dead. To understand if Othon was in France at the time of his death, we have to consider a document in the archives of the Diocese of Langres. This states that Othon died in 1234, while his second wife, Elizabeth, died 2 years later. In that period, Langres was part of the country of Burgundy, in the region of Fauvent-Dampierre-Beaujeu, west of Saône, part of the ecclesiastical ward where the Ray family had their properties. The fact that this paper is kept in Langres diocese could prove that Othon and Elizabeth lived in France until the end of their lives. Despite that, some studies state that after having obtained the lordship of Athens, Othon de la Roche never returned to France, but no one should explain. If he remained in Athens, why was he not buried as his successors were in Daphne Monastery? Othon was not buried in Athens or in his own town, but in the Abbey of Bellevaux, which housed the tombs of the lords of La Roche in the chapel of Saint-Pierre. In the church of Saint-Laurent in Sevaux, a small village near Ray-sur-Saône, we can still see his tombstone. The stone in question is one of the collateral victims of the French Revolution. Many of the architectural elements of the abbey, as well as the tombs, have been detached and dispersed by revolutionary rage, and were subsequently found in nearby places. A close replica of this can be seen in Ray Castle, in the middle of the tower floor, near to the coffer. He is represented with his hands joined in prayer, wearing an ermine gown, a sign of royalty. The plate has the following epitaph. Under this rock is buried Othon of Ray. Pray God that the enemy will never surprise him again. It has been suggested that this plate does not represent Othon but his nephew Othenin, who lived almost 1 century later. But the headstone of Othenin de la Roche would be found in Vorey-sur-Lognon, department of Haute-Saône, Franc Country, and it also comes from Bellevaux Abbey. Now we come to the last question. Could the shroud have been kept in the coffer present in Ray-sur-Saône Castle, and which is described below? Once opened its inner dimension, there are more or less 37.5 centimeters long, 16.5 wide, and 25 deep. The most suitable folding pattern for the coffer dimension is in 96. This can be obtained with 12 folds in the length and 8 in the width. So we obtain 96 rectangles, 36.33 centimeters long and 13.75 wide. We have a lot of witnesses regarding the existence of coffers in which the shroud was preserved during its movements in different countries. At the Shroud Museum in Turin, we can see the coffer used for moving the shroud from Chambéry to Turin in 1578. Its shape and dimensions are very similar to that of the one found in Ray-sur-Saône Castle. Further proof supporting the hypothesis of a link between Lord of Ray-sur-Saône and the shroud is the fact that the family's show cabinet, which contains the coffer, also features a drape, 50 centimeters long and 30 wide, with floral ornaments. On the fabric is painted the frontal part of a male human being, extremely similar to the man of the shroud. This piece looks a lot like the painting of the Besançon shroud that have only the frontal image. In any case, it is striking that this object is really in the castle of Roche with the coffer and could be a further connection between the shroud tradition and the de la Roche family. Papal sanctions on traffic of relics stolen in Constantinople could justify absence of documents regarding this period. Moreover, among decisions made during the 12th Ecumenical Council, the Fourth Lateran started on November 11, 1215. They stated that saint relics should be shown in reliquaries and new ones could not be venerated without Roman Church authorization. According to the statement, it would have been difficult to explain to ecclesiastic authorities the presence in the family's hands of these important relics stolen in Constantinople. After 150 years, the shroud was kept in a collegiate church not far from Roche-sur-Saône castle. Geoffroy I de Charny is considered the first owner of the shroud in Lirey in the 14th century. Different elements make us think that this was not completely true. It is quite strange that the Charny family did not publicly show this precious treasure until the middle of the 14th century. It was not by chance that Geoffroy I, a well-known knight in France for his bravery, a friend of kings and popes, waited until his wedding with Jeanne de Vergy before exhibiting the shroud. We need to point out that if Othon de la Roche had descendants, one of them was Jeanne de Vergy and not Geoffroy I. Jeanne probably brought the shroud for the wedding with this personality. Moreover, on the brass plaque found in the Seine in the 19th century, there are the coats of arms of both families, not only the Charny. Besides, not even in one document about Geoffroy de Charny, the shroud was mentioned. In fact, his son, Geoffroy I, did not inherit a shroud when his father died. As in documents related to the foundation of the collegiate church, a lot of relics are mentioned, but not the shroud. In the end, the chance that the shroud was property of Jeanne de Vergy is supported by the fact that in the period between 1360 and 1389, the shroud was preserved in the castle of Montfort and Othon, a de Vergy property. It is plausible that the decision to exhibit the shroud in Lirey was made in the period after that in which Geoffroy I obtained the shroud, that is after his wedding with Jeanne de Vergy. To prove the relationship between Jeanne de Vergy and Othon de la Roche, we have to analyze family trees of some noble families from Franche County and Burgundy between the 12th and 14th centuries. As said below, for our interest, Othon II is important. Let's now see the de Vergy family. These genealogical trees show how Jeanne de Vergy was related in the 5th generation to Othon de la Roche. It was this woman, descendant of the first Lord of Athens, who married Geoffroy I de Charny. It is through this wedding that the most loyal and valorous of all knights obtained the shroud that, through different generations, we can suppose came in the hands of the de Vergy from the de la Roche family. But this relationship on its own does not explain when, how, or why the shroud changed ownership from Roche-sur-Saône to de Vergy. At the moment, we can just hypothesize. Considering these points, the transfer of the shroud from the lords of Ré could be linked to the murder of the 6th and last Duke of Athens, Gauthier V de Brienne, which took place on May 13th, 1311, around Lake Copet. This event ended the history of the French dukedom of Athens that the Ré family had maintained for a long time. This was certainly a difficult period for the family, a period in which they needed money to fortify the dukedom. The most simple way to obtain a good amount was to give up a valuable thing. In this period, the link between the two families was already established, as described below. The fact that the shroud arrived in the hands of the de Vergy family rather than in other families related with the La Roche, could be linked to the fact that in 1191, the Duvergy family became Seneschal of Burgundy, a very important political position. The transfer could also have taken place while Jeanne was going to marry Geoffroy I de Charny, a well-known and trustworthy man in France. Hence, it is possible that in a difficult period, the De La Roche family was compelled to give up the shroud in the hands of a trustworthy family, and particularly of a family able to guard the secret regarding the origin of this object. As regards the secrecy with which the shroud may have been preserved, we must not forget what makes Clement VII related to the second husband of Marguerite de Charny at the time of the dispute of Luray. Clement VII changes his mind, correcting the papal bull of January 1390, and writing a new one a few months later with some important fixes. As I said at the beginning, the Greek track has a long history. This is what we can read in a book of the 18th century. What I have tried to prove in these pages about the shroud's missing years would be one more piece in the puzzle of the history of the shroud. A set of elements make us suppose the shroud passed through Athens, thanks to Othon de la Roche at the beginning of the 13th century. To this noble Burgundy family are linked a series of attestations that, if further confirmed, would help to set the shroud's arrival in Europe a long time before the middle of the 14th century. Nowadays, this hypothesis appears the most likely one, well documented and able to give a series of ideas for further research that other hypotheses cannot suggest. I do not think we can say that the missing period is definitely solved, as we still have a lot of research to do. Currently, I'm considering some unpublished documents which apparently would place a shroud in Athens a few years after 1205. If the sources in question should prove to be reliable and verifiable, we might add a new piece to the puzzle of the so-called Greek track. This work has to be considered as the seeds of ongoing research, not the end, but just the beginning. Thank you very much for your kind attention. If you have any questions, these are the contacts of the author. You are kindly invited to contact him for clarifying any doubts. Thank you.
Let's give Michele a round. So, thank you so much. So, who knew there could be so many theories? We have one more presentation before dinner, and we have heard from Mario earlier. He is a PhD in computer science, and he's also, and I've also read in your bio that you have published a book on the Shroud.
It's